Zeus, your son has returned! I bring the destruction of Olympus!
The PlayStation 2 only had 32 megabytes of RAM and a 294 MHz CPU. Yet, developers pulled off coding miracles that mathematically shouldn't exist on this hardware. Here are the top 9 PS2 games that pushed the console to its absolute breaking point. We kick off the list with a massive open world achievement from Naughty Dog, the genius studio that would later go on to create Uncharted and The Last of Us. Released in 2004, Jak 3 did something that seemed like an absolute fantasy back then, rendering a giant, seamless world with zero loading screens. To pull this off without crashing the console's tiny 32 megabytes of RAM, Naughty Dog invented an aggressive background level streaming technology. As you rocket through the wasteland desert at high speeds, the game was actively reading data from the disk and loading the next sector right ahead of you, while simultaneously unloading the map behind your back. When you factor in the real-time vehicle physics, the dynamic ragdoll effects, and the heavy sandstorm particles, this game was an absolute programming miracle that kept the gameplay buttery smooth. If you think detailed facial animations and complex lighting systems are exclusive to modern gaming, you haven't looked closely at Silent Hill 3. Released in 2003, Konami's Team Silent managed to craft a face model of the protagonist, Heather Mason, that was so phenomenally detailed, it legitimately rivaled early PlayStation 3 titles. The developers pulled off this visual marvel by routing a massive chunk of the PS2's video memory purely to character models during dialogue scenes to make the horror atmosphere truly suffocating. They built a spectacular real-time flashlight shadow engine instead of using fake, pre-baked shadows. The shadows in Silent Hill 3 bent are stretched realistically against uneven walls based on where your flashlight was pointed. They even added a unique film grain noise filter across the screen, not just for style, but to cleverly mask the low resolution of the textures.
Welcome!
Originally, Resident Evil 4 was built from the ground up as an exclusive for the Nintendo GameCube, a console featuring a much more modern and powerful graphics pipeline than the older PS2. When Capcom announced they were porting it to the PlayStation 2, critics claimed the console's texture pipelines would completely bottleneck and crash. But Capcom engineers pulled off a historic triumph of optimization. To prevent the hardware from running out of memory, they had to scale down the overall polygon count of the environments and switch to compressed textures. However, they kept the core gameplay intact. The massive crowds of aggressive enemy AI, the intense action sequences, they used pre-rendered, recorded cutscenes for PS2, and the groundbreaking over-the-shoulder camera dynamic that changed third-person shooters forever. It stands today as a classic example of how creative engineering can overcome weak hardware specs.
What are you buying?
Now for the undisputed king of nostalgia, GTA San Andreas. While a lot of gamers argued this title deserves the #1 spot, wait until you see the tech hacks coming up next. What Rockstar Games achieved with this map size was nothing short of legendary, fitting an entire fictional state featuring 3 completely unique cities, vast countrysides, mountains, variable weather cycles, and continuous radio station streaming into a single 32 megabytes of RAM budget was a nightmare task. Rockstar had to write a highly aggressive renderware engine optimization system. The game actively calculated your traveling speed. If you flew a plane too fast, it dynamically pulled down the draw distance and rolled in heavy fog to hide the fact that trees, buildings, and traffic were literally populating and streaming in right under your nose, just fractions of a second before you arrived. Next up is a game that boldly defied the hardware laws of its own console generation, Gran Turismo 4. During the early 2000s, standard PS2 ran at 480i standard definition that was considered the absolute low of the console's video output capability. But Polyphony Digital completely threw the rulebook away by directly overriding the console's internal graphics synthesizer registers. They forced the PS2 to output a true 1080i high definition signal. Yes, you heard me right, 1080i high definition signal. They accomplished this through a genius software interlacing trick that rendered alternating horizontal lines at lightning speeds, effectively slicing the rendering workload in half while outputting a razor-sharp HD visual. Combined with over 700 highly detailed car models and a rock-solid frame rate, this game proved that the PS2 had hidden horsepower that normal developers never even touched. Square Enix has always been a titan when it comes to jaw-dropping visual fidelity, but with Final Fantasy XII, they pushed the PlayStation 2 into completely unmapped territory. In all previous Final Fantasy titles on the system, exploring and fighting were kept separate. It turning a battle meant the screen would flash, pause, and load a completely restricted separate battle arena. Final Fantasy XII completely destroyed that limitation by introducing the active dimension battle system. They constructed a seamless, grand-scale world where massive bosses and enemies roamed the open fields in real time, featuring breathtaking draw distances, dynamic lighting, and dense city architectures. This game didn't look like a 2006 console title. It looked like a high-end PC game running a heavy graphics mode. Hideo Kojima is a perfectionist who refuses to compromise on his artistic vision. While Metal Gear Solid 2 took place on a clean, geometric offshore factory that was relatively easy for the PS2 to draw, Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater demanded that the hardware render on incredibly dense, organic Soviet jungle. Every single blade of grass had its own collision. The game was constantly calculating your real-time camouflage percentage against the environment, and the complex enemy patrol AI had to navigate irregular terrains. This put an astronomical strain on the console's Emotion Engine CPU. In fact, during heavy explosion scenes, the frame rate would visually dip, not because the game was poorly optimized, but because Kojima's vision was demanding more raw mathematics than the silicon chips were physically manufactured to handle. Long before modern commercial engines like Unreal or Unity existed, Team Ico built a technical masterpiece that mathematically shouldn't have functioned on this console. Shadow of the Colossus presented an enormous, desolate open world with zero loading zones, held together by a groundbreaking physics-based climbing system. When you are hanging onto a moving 100-foot-tall titan and its fur is reacting dynamically to gravity, momentum, and the wind, the PS2 was working at its absolute maximum capacity, often dropping the frame rate down to a cinematic 20 FPS. To achieve this impossible scale, Team Ico programmed customized vertex shaders and a primitive form of LOD streaming level of detail, stretching the PS2's low-level microcode further than almost any other developer in history. The absolute #1 spot belongs to The Ghost of Sparta, released in 2007, well after the next generation PlayStation 3 had already hit the market. Santa Monica Studio decided to drop one final, devastating graphical masterpiece on the aging PS2, God of War 2. The developers achieved this legendary feat by writing custom, ultra-optimized assembly code specifically for the PS2's secondary processing cores, known as vector units (VU1). By shifting the graphical math away from the main CPU, they were able to crowd the screen with up to 50 highly aggressive enemies at once, render jaw-dropping cinematic titan boss fights that transitioned seamlessly into real-time gameplay, and maintain a buttery smooth frame rate target of 60 FPS. God of War 2 didn't just push the limits, it shattered them entirely. It stands as the definitive crown jewel of the PlayStation 2's technical lifespan. The PlayStation 2 library is absolute massive, and trying to squeeze every single technical miracle into just one list of 9 is literally impossible. There are so many other legendary titles out there that completely broke the rules of this 32 megabytes of machine, which is why part 2 is 100% happening. But this time, I'm not making the list, you are. Drop a comment right now and tell me which PS2 game pushed the hardware limits the most and absolutely deserves a spot in part 2. I'll be reading every through the comments and pinning the best responses. Make sure to smash that subscribe button and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.